There's been a lot of changes to the tests in recent times. So the last couple of years, there's been quite a few changes in the test makeup and formatting, some smaller changes to the ACT, some big changes to the SAT. It was completely overhauled and revamped in March of 2016. And another big change has been that the state of Ohio, we'll talk about this in detail, is now using the ACT as a potential, and the SAT for that matter, as a potential pathway for graduation from high school. As a result, all Ohio juniors will take the ACT in the spring of their junior year, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the dates which the schools are giving the pencil to paper format of the test can either be March 21st or April 19th for the ACT, and for the SAT it would be March 1st or April 5th, if they are choosing to do the pencil to paper format. If your school is choosing to do the online format, there is a window of time with which they're allowed to give the test. So let's spend a couple minutes talking about the two tests and just kind of the layout and the format of the tests. The ACT is out of 36 points, and it is made up of 5 components. 4 are required when you register. In the black lettering there, you'll see English, math, reading, and science, and they're given in that order. Each of the sections is out of 36 points, or 36 points, and then the overall composite is found by adding up your score from each of those 4 independent sections and then dividing by 36, and that will give you your overall composite score. In addition, there is one optional section that is on writing. That is one question. You have 30 minutes. Actually, I'm sorry, you have 40 minutes, and it's 12 points. It is a separate score on your score report, so it does not have any bearing or does not figure into the overall composite of the ACT. And then you can see the questions, how many questions and how many minutes. I won't walk you through that. I know you guys can read that on the screen. For the SAT, the total score is 1,600 points with 2 sections, each out of 800. So there's an evidence-based reading and writing score that's out of 800, and it's made up of a reading test and a writing and language test. And then there is a math test, which is out of 800, which is made up of 2 math sections. One is a non-calculator math section, and one is a calculator math section. So as you can imagine, in the non-calculator section, students are not allowed to use their calculator. In addition, within the math section, there are 13 questions that are what they call free response, where there are no multiple choice answers given. And students must work out the questions and then bubble their answer into a grid. So there's 5 of those on the non-calculator section and 8 of those on the calculator section. And so you would take your score out of 800 on the evidence-based reading and writing and your score out of 800 on the math, and you would add them together to get a total score out of 1,600. There is also an optional essay that you have 50 minutes to write, and it's also out of 12 points. And again, this section has no bearing on the overall composite score for the SAT. So I'm going to launch another poll here. I did one poll already. The next poll is going to ask you guys if you know which test your child is planning to take. You may not know, and that's okay. You know, it's all right. Some of you have 9th graders and 10th graders, so you might not know which test. Some of you might know. Just kind of curious to get an idea. Some of you might decide, yeah, we're going to do both tests, and hopefully by the end of tonight you might have a better idea as to maybe which test might be better for your child. So as this poll is kind of getting underway, we're looking at about a third of the people are saying ACT only, about half are saying ACT and SAT combined, and the other 20% are sort of saying, yeah, I'm not really sure at this point. And that's fine. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. I was just kind of curious. What we find in Ohio is that most kids at least try the ACT, and the majority do focus on the ACT. Nothing wrong with trying the SAT. We'll talk a little bit more about how they are similar and different as we go through this presentation, and it might give you a better sense as to which test your child would be better at. The bottom line is every college accepts either test score. So your goal as a student is to figure out which test am I better at taking, and then focus on getting that score as high as possible. So that should really be your ultimate goal. All right, so moving on, as I alluded to a little bit earlier in the presentation, there are now what they call pathways to Ohio diplomas. If any of you are in on this call and you have older students, a senior in high school or older, you will remember that your child had to pass something called the Ohio graduation test in order to graduate from high school. That test has been done away with, and they have come up with 3 new pathways to receiving a diploma in the state of Ohio. And this would be in addition to getting your required credits in coursework at your school. So one is workforce readiness, which is for those students that want to go directly into the workforce. LEAP doesn't really focus on that because our main goal as a company is to work on students who are college bound and going into the college arena. So workforce readiness is one, and that's for plenty of kids choose that option. 2 would be end of course exams. There are end of course exams in a variety of classes, and your child can take an exam in those courses at the end of the year, and each exam has a point value attached to it. And if they pass the exam, they can get a certain number of points, and over their high school career, they must earn 18 points. So that would be one way. And then the third way is what we call college and career readiness tests, which essentially are the ACT or SAT. And the state of Ohio has come up with what they call remediation-free scores for these 2 tests. And as you can see in the box on the bottom of your screen, for the ACT, they're saying that if a student takes the ACT and they get an 18 or higher on English, a 22 or higher on math, a 22 or higher on reading, and they're not going to focus on the science at this point, your child would qualify, this will qualify as a graduation pathway for your child. On the SAT, it's a 430 in writing, a 520 in math, and a 450 in reading. So when you look at those values, students would need to score these scores or higher in order to be able to use these tests for graduation. Now, the biggest question I get is, do you have to get all of that on the same test? And the answer is no. So if you took the ACT one time and got a 22 in math, but maybe you had a 17 in English, and then the next time you took the test and you got a 19 in English, but maybe your math dropped down to a 20, you could use both of those tests. One would give you your passing math score, one would give you your passing English score. You are not able to use, let's say, your math ACT score and then the SAT writing and reading. You can't cross over between the 2 tests. You can use multiple tests of the same type, so you can take the test numerous times, but you cannot use part of an ACT and part of an SAT. The state has decided, let me go to my next, the state has decided because of these pathways and allowing the ACT and SAT to be a pathway to graduation, they have decided to administer the test to all juniors in the spring. So while we're on this slide, I'm going to launch another poll. And my question this time is going to be, do you know when the state test is at your school? So every school has been given or chosen a test date. I gave you some of those possible dates earlier in the presentation. For the ACT, it was March 21st or April 19th if you're doing pencil to paper. And for the SAT, it was, I believe, March 1st and April 5th. So every school has chosen a date. Do you know what that date is for your school? Now, if you have a sophomore or a freshman, you may not know that date, and it's not going to be important to you right now. It's going to be important to you during the junior year. Some things to note with this test is that there will be no writing portion administered with this test. It is going to be just the main 4 multiple choice components. There are no Ohio schools that require the essay at this point in time, so they're not going to be giving the essay portion as part of the test that your child will take at school. I'm going to go ahead and close this poll out. It looks like people are done responding. And we've got about 35% that said yes, they do know when that test is at their school. They've got 35% that said no, they're not really sure when that is, or no, they don't know when it is, and 29 say they're not sure. So, that could be a product of the fact that we do have quite a few 9th and 10th graders on the call. So probably my guess is that the juniors that are on this webinar are in that 35% that said yes, that most of them are going to know when they're taking that test at school. So for you sophomores and freshmen that are logged in and participating tonight, you'll get that information next year about when that will be, but it will be in March or April of your junior year. So as we think about this state test and this free test that's offered at school, this is free to every student. It doesn't cost you anything. It's given during the regular school day, and it is a valid test that you can use and send the results to a college should this be a good score for you or a score that you want to send to a college. And it can be used for that graduation testing. The scores will be available to you in 3 to 8 weeks after testing. You would have to log into your online ACT account, and you can see your scores there. Now, schools will be registering students for this free test, but if you already have an ACT account, there is going to be a way for them to merge your current account with the account that your school is setting up for your student. And this little graphic here just shows that many schools have chosen March 21st as the date to give the ACT. Most schools in Ohio that I'm aware of have chosen the ACT over the SAT, and most have chosen March 21st. The schools that have not chosen March 21st tend to be the schools that are on spring break that week, because this was something that the state came up with over the summer, and it was announced in the summer, and so schools really didn't have a lot of advance notice. So many schools' calendars were already set once prior to the state telling schools that they were going to allow them to give this test. So if you were on spring break that week, certainly you're not going to choose that as your date to administer the test to all the students. That wouldn't really work out well. So at any rate, should you take the test more than once? And the short answer to that is yes. Studies show that 56% of all ACT and SAT test takers will increase their score in a second attempt. And interestingly, that stat is the same for SAT testers as well as ACT testers. But what we find is fascinating is 83.4% of LEAP students increase their score in a second attempt, meaning that students that engage in some type of preparation through LEAP see 83.4% of those kids see an increase in their score when they take the test a second time. So the chart that you see here, kind of in the orange box, gives us, shows you sort of the increase that they typically see. ACT did an in-depth study on first attempts to second attempts. So if we just go down here to somebody that got a 24 the first time, they're likely to get a 25 on their second attempt, and the most likely range of them retesting is a 24 to 26. 57% of those kids do see an increase to a 25 or 26 or higher, with 21% staying the same and 22% decreasing. So, if you were told that you had a 57% chance of winning the lottery, most people would go out and play the lottery a second time. And we feel that kids can maximize their score if they take the test a second time. The odds are in their favor, and the odds are especially in your favor if you do some prep or willing to put some effort into increasing your score. Now, what we find personally at LEAP, the lower your starting score is, the larger increase you're likely to see. The higher your starting score is, the smaller your increase. So if you're already starting out in the upper 20s, you might see a 1 to 2 point increase. Whereas if you're starting out in the low to mid 20s, you might see a 2 to 3, maybe even 4 or 5 point increase, depending on how much effort you put in and a lot of factors, quite honestly, how much prep you do and how much work and time is spent. But it is worth taking the test more than one time. So when we're talking about timing and when you should take this test, we recommend 2 to 3 times total. And really the biggest factor when deciding when to test really hinges upon when you take Algebra 2. So for the average student, they take Algebra 2 in the 11th grade, and we'll go through a scenario if you've taken Algebra 2, if you're going to finish it before 11th grade. But for right now, we're talking about students that are going to be in Algebra 2 as a junior in high school, which is the typical sequence of mathematics. Most juniors are taking Algebra 2 as a junior. Some schools, there's a few out there, that flip-flop geometry and Algebra 2, and their sequence is Algebra 1 as a freshman, Algebra 2 as a 10th grader, and geometry as a junior. So if your school is in that order of sequence for math, then we're talking to those that would be in geometry as a junior, but they've already completed Algebra 2. So the math test, the math portion is really the driving factor of when you should test. It really helps us dictate the timeline because 20 to 30% of the math test includes Algebra 2 content and likewise really geometry content. So if you're missing one of those two classes, you're really going to be at a disadvantage on the math portion of the test. So we recommend for those that are in Algebra 2 as a junior, your first attempt should be the spring test at school, that free test that's offered by the state of Ohio at your school. Then your second attempt should be in June, and that'll be on your own. You'll be paying for that on your own. And then if you need a third attempt, which is optional, you could then test in September. And again, you're going to be paying for that test. That's on your own. So that's a great timeline for those kids that are in Algebra 2 as an 11th grader. Before we move on, let's go ahead and talk about, I'm going to launch another poll here. When will your child complete Algebra 2? So, or do you, yeah, the question is really, will your child complete Algebra 2 prior to their junior year? So if the answer is yes, that means that they're in Algebra 2 as a sophomore. If the answer is no, that means they're going to be taking Algebra 2 as a junior. So it looks like a lot of people are responding. And if you're not sure, you might not be sure. It might be too early to tell if you have a younger child, and that's okay too. But it looks like an overwhelming number of people on this particular call are saying that their child will complete Algebra 2 at the end of their sophomore year. So that's great. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll so you can see the questions again. Now let's move on to those that would be completing Algebra 2 before 11th grade and look at that timeline. So if we're looking at the timeline for students that are in Algebra 2 as a sophomore and have completed both geometry and Algebra 2 at the end of their sophomore year, they can start testing a little earlier. If they want, they can make their first attempt in September, October, or December of their junior year. So early on in junior year, get that first attempt out of the way. Then their second attempt would be in spring during that free test at school. So you would take that free test at school in the spring. And then the third attempt would be in June on their own or on your own. So you'd be paying for that test on your own. So a little bit pushed up timeline, meaning you can start earlier, which means you can finish by the end of junior year, allowing senior year to really focus on senior year stuff and applications and classwork, not having to really worry about testing in your senior year. So again, this really is dependent upon when your child is taking Algebra 2. So should you take the optional essay portion of the ACT or SAT? Colleges do vary in requirement for this component of the test. As I mentioned, it's optional. There's an extra charge for it. You have to stay longer to take it on test day. In the state of Ohio, there are no schools that are requiring it right now. It says all, I've got in this box here, it says all public schools no longer require it. I don't believe there are any private schools that require it either. I think they all dropped it this year actually. So we do recommend, however, that your child take the optional essay portion of the test at least one time. There are some out-of-state schools that require it, and unless your child has a 100% solid list on where they're applying and none of those schools require it, it is wise to have an essay score. Because college, what if you decide, or if your child decides in the fall of senior year that there's a school they want to apply to and it requires the essay? This happened to, it wasn't actually somebody that Leap had worked with, it was somebody I'd met through friends of my son's. And what I found, what the student did was he took the test end of junior year, got a really great score, was really happy with the score, and decided he wasn't going to take it again. But he didn't take the essay portion. So when it came time to apply in the fall of senior year, he applied and sent all of his applications in, and he was kind of getting some feedback, and all of a sudden he checked this one school. He really wanted to go to this one school in Florida, and he noticed that his application was incomplete. Well, after further investigation, he realized that that particular school required the essay, and he did not have an essay score. So this student had to go in December of senior year, take the entire ACT over. You are not able to just go and take just the essay portion. He had to take the entire ACT over, including the essay, just to get that essay score so that his application would be complete. So you're better off if you do take the test on your own at some point, paying the extra $15 and taking the essay just one time. You don't need to do it every time, but just so that you have an essay score, just in case your child changes his mind. We all know that high school students and teenagers sometimes change their mind, and so there's always that chance that they may decide to fall in love with a school in the fall of senior year, and if they don't have the essay and the school requires it, they'd have to go take the whole test over again, which is a little stressful. So take the essay one time. It will not be included on that state testing, as I mentioned earlier. So that brings me to the next popular question that I get from families. Do colleges see all of the scores that your child takes? And the short answer is no. You have choice of which scores the schools see, as long as you don't select 4 schools to automatically get your scores when you take the test. When you register for a test, it's going to ask you, which 4 colleges do you want to send these scores to? And if you choose those 4 schools, your scores will automatically be sent to those schools, whether it's a good score or not. If you don't choose to send them, then once you're applying to colleges, you can go in and pick which score or scores you want to send to the college that you're applying to. Now, I do have to be honest and tell you, it's going to cost you $12 per school, per score that you send later on. So if you send the scores at the time that you test, it's included or free, so to speak. If you send the scores later, it's going to cost you $12. So we look at it as sort of like a little insurance policy. I would never submit a paper I haven't proofread, or turn in something, or put something out there that I haven't seen the results of first, the final product. So my opinion is, see your child's scores, get all their scores, see how they did, and then you have control of which colleges see those scores. Now, there are a few schools out there, some highly selective ones, that do state on their application that they want to see every set of scores you've ever taken. And in that case, it would be in your, sort of ethically you should submit all of the scores. So it is definitely some of those higher selective schools. There's not many out there, but a few of them word it that way. Otherwise, you can just send your best set of scores to each college. So how many times can you test? You can take the test up to 12 times. I don't know anybody that's ever done that. That's a lot of times. The most I know of is 5 or 6 times. I don't necessarily recommend that. That is a lot of times to test. Kids do tend to plateau after about the 3rd attempt, but we do see some kids improve their score in a 4th or 5th attempt. We had a girl this past fall who took it, I think in September it was, for the 6th time. The mom didn't want her to take it again. I didn't think she should take it again. She had worked really hard in between every attempt, and I think she had plateaued and kind of repeated a score around attempt 4 or 5, but she was really set on trying to get this one particular score. It was a pretty high score. And so we kind of put together a plan for her to try one more time, even though her mom and I weren't sure it was a good idea. And she worked really hard, and she actually improved her score. So it does happen, but you really have to the student has to be very motivated and driven to make that happen. So what about the SAT? So SAT is a similar timeline. If you're in Algebra 2 in 11th grade, it's going to be really for both the SAT, regardless of which math you're going to be in. It's going to be a similar timeline to the ACT. If you're trying to determine whether you might want to take the ACT and the SAT or which one you'd be better at, you can take both of them at the same time and kind of compare your score. Or if you have a PSAT result and then you take the ACT, we can compare those two test scores and we can really get an idea of which test your child might be better at taking. There are some kids out there that really do better on the SAT. So it is really important for those kids to identify which test they're better at taking. And again, the PSAT can give us a sneak peek or kind of a window into that. So content on the two tests. English for both tests really focuses on grammar and writing. Writing as far as they will ask you multiple choice questions about your knowledge of writing, which they call rhetorical skills. Those would be questions like, what's the best topic sentence for this paragraph? Or which is the best transition sentence for this paragraph? So those are the types of questions you're going to see on the English in addition to grammar. They're going to give you a sentence, have a portion of it underlined, ask you if it should stay the way it is, or give you some options for changing it, and you would pick the most correct grammatically fitting piece to go in there. The reading focuses on comprehension and vocabulary as well as your reading speed. Really, especially for the ACT, the speed is very tightly timed. Math up through Algebra 2. On the ACT, there are can be 4 to 6 trig questions. Of those 4 to 6 trig questions, 3 of them are typically on a topic that was covered in geometry. So really there's about 3 what I would call true trig questions. So if your child is not going to have had trig before they take the ACT or the SAT, they really shouldn't panic or stress out about it. That's not that big of a deal. They can still get an excellent math score. But they really do want to have that geometry and Algebra 2 under their belt, or at least most of it, before they start seriously testing. Science on the ACT only focuses on reading and interpreting data. It is a reading and reasoning test that is based on scientific content. You really don't need a lot of outside science knowledge to be successful on this test. There are maybe out of 40 questions, maybe 4 or 5 that require outside science knowledge. The rest of the questions require the student to go through the data that's presented and interpret it, analyze the charts, and answer questions based on it. And then the essay is optional, as we mentioned, and it's a positional question where students have to analyze and offer their perspective on an issue. So the tests are similar in many, many ways, more so than they used to be. They used to be a lot more different, but they are more similar. However, there are still some differences. We'll get to those in just a second, kind of a capsulation of overall determining the differences between the two. But if your child is a sophomore and did not take the PSAT last fall, and you're wondering, gosh, maybe the PSAT or the SAT is the test for my child, or most of the juniors took the PSAT in the fall, so you've got that result. But for sophomores, or if you think that your child is a very high-achieving sophomore, you might want to consider a practice PSAT or practice PSAT test. We're going to offer one of those in April. And then if you want to, or if you did take the PSAT, we do have on our LEAP website the 4 action steps to take from PSAT scores. And you can watch that webinar at your leisure to see what those scores mean and what to do with them. So really, you want to choose the test that's best for you. As a summary, the ACT is a very fast-paced test. Kids have to work at a very quick clip, and they really have to work on their pacing. A lot of kids struggle with finishing the ACT. The SAT has a higher reading level, and it includes vocabulary, whereas the ACT does not really focus on vocabulary. The SAT's reading level is at a 12th, 13th grade reading level. So that's a much higher reading level than the ACT, which is at a 9th, 10th grade reading level. The ACT math is definitely more broader and more challenging. The SAT has the non-calculator section and the non-multiple choice questions, as I mentioned, and there's more words to read on that test. So you need to have a better reading level to do the SAT math. And then on the SAT, there's very little geometry. There's only about 6% geometry on the SAT versus 23% on the ACT. Now, while you're looking at that, I just realized I forgot to do another poll, which was going to ask you about whether your child was thinking of taking the writing portion at some point on the test. So go ahead and kind of fill that in. Do you think that you'll do the writing portion at some point on the test? And kind of, again, no right or wrong answer here, just sort of a kind of an informational. So kind of getting about 60% saying yeah, 40% not sure, and that's great. That's, you know, I recommend that as you develop your list of schools, if there's even one school that might possibly want the writing, that you consider taking that. So great, thanks. Okay, moving on. As a summary, the ACT is typically better for non-readers or kids that don't love to read and good math students, really strong math students. The SAT is typically better for really strong readers and might be better for slower test takers. And again, these are generalizations. Every student is different, and so it's, you know, just because your student is a really strong reader does not mean that maybe the ACT wouldn't be a good test for them. Again, these are sort of guidelines to start you out and thinking in the right direction. So what's a good score on the ACT or the SAT? Well, a good score for the ACT, it's going to really vary by the student, quite honestly. So a good score for student A may not be a good score for student B. So looking at the ACT, though, to give you percentiles, the national average for the ACT is a 50th percent is a 21. If you have a 24 on the ACT, you're scoring in the top 25% of all testers. So that's a really great score. And if you have a 28 on the ACT, you're in the top 10, it's really top 11% of all testers. For the SAT, the data shows that 1080 is the top 50%. If you have a 1220, you're in the top 25, or you're scoring better than 75% of the people that took the test. And if you have a 1340, you're scoring better than 90%, or in other words, you're in the top 10% of those taking the test. So again, a good score is going to be different for everyone. Sometimes a good score is determined by where you want to go to college. You want to look at a college and see what their student profile is. That is the average GPA, ACT, and SAT score for that college. And your goal is to try to be at or above that average. So what are the costs for taking these tests? They're very similar. The ACT is up to $58.50 if you include the writing, and it's $42.50 if you don't take the writing. And the SAT is $54.50 with the writing and $43 without. So they're very close in price. They're close in the cost that if you send the scores later, they're about $12 to send later. It's $11.25 for the SAT. The third bullet point down on each side, that is for some particular test dates throughout the year. You can pay to get the test questions and the answers and your child's answers. And it's about $20 for the ACT and $18 for the SAT. So that is a nice feature. For the ACT, it is you're able to do this for the April, June, and December tests. For the SAT, I believe it's maybe May or June, and then October, I believe. I'm not 100% sure on that. We'll have to double check that one. It used to be January, but they've done away with the January test date, so I'm not sure exactly. There's only 2 now that are left that you can order the test dates. They may add a third one, but they haven't done that to my knowledge. And with both of them, you can view your scores for free online. So please make sure that when you do register for the test, that you keep track of your username and password, and you keep that handy so that you can log in at any time to see your scores. That's really going to be the main way to see your scores. They don't mail you paper copies any longer. Being purposeful about when you test can save you money. So thinking about a testing timeline is kind of important. We'll talk a little about that in a little bit. Will superscoring help me? So if you've taken the test multiple times, you can take your highest score from each attempt, add them up, and divide by 4. For the ACT, or for the SAT, you can take your highest attempt from each test attempt and add them together. So not all schools do that. There are, oops, I didn't mean to, oops, kind of jumped ahead there. Sorry about that, guys. Let me go back here. Okay, I thought I had a little pop-up that would tell us a few schools in Ohio that do SuperScore. Some schools off the top of my head that do SuperScore are Miami of Ohio, Xavier University in Ohio, Dayton, University of Dayton, I believe Butler in Indiana, and Indiana University all allow you to SuperScore for the ACT. Some other schools SuperScore the SAT only. That would be Ohio University does that. I believe Dayton does both, Miami does both, so some schools do both. It can help you. If you're in question and you have 2 or 3 test attempts and you're not sure if your SuperScore is higher, just contact me and I can help you with that. So we do offer a Prep Essentials class, which we recommend that students take prior to their first attempt. It's a great way to get students prepared for that first test attempt going into taking the test. Some kids choose to do a cold baseline, or they've done a practice test with LEAP, or they've done a practice test with another company. So if that's the case, you can use that as a baseline and then take the class. Some kids just choose to take the class and then take the test for the first time. If the national increase, if you've taken the test twice, is about 1.1 point. At LEAP, our increase is about 3.4 points for people that do test prep from one attempt to the next. So you definitely are getting higher results when you do some kind of focused prep with LEAP. So what if you think your child will qualify for testing accommodations? Students that have a 504 or an IEP in school may qualify for some extended time or some other accommodations that are in place by the 2 tests, by ACT and SAT. It does not guarantee you that you will get approval, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. So you would need to work with your school to apply. I often recommend that people provide any kind of documentation if you've done an assessment with a doctor, or if you have a formal diagnosis of some type of learning situation that your child might have, or something that might prevent them from taking the test under regular time conditions, or might require them to have extra time, or have a reader. They will provide it with some students with test readers, or some students get to take the test over multiple days. So you want to apply early. Testing, you can be denied initially for this extra testing accommodations, but you can always appeal that as well. So it's definitely something that you want to look into. Your school guidance counselor can probably give you some guidance on this and some indication as to whether your child may or may not be a candidate to apply. Many times athletes are looking at colleges and need a particular score to qualify to play or qualify for some type of a scholarship or to get into the school. And so if you go to the NCAA Clearinghouse website, they will give you a really clear-cut chart. And really, for as far as the NCAA is concerned, they're looking at the sum total of your score, not a composite or an average. So typically, the higher your GPA, the lower your test score requirement needs to be. So if you look at this example for Division I school, somebody with a 3.5 GPA only needs to have a total of 37 points on the ACT. That means if you added up the English score, the math score, the reading score, the writing score, you only need 37 points. That really only averages out to be about 9 points out of 36 on each section. So that's a pretty low score. Most kids with a 3.5 are going to score much higher than that. However, if you have a 2.55 GPA, you need to have 66 total points, which is about 16 or 17 points per area, so a much higher required score in order to qualify. So there's a sliding scale there. that you can look at. You can see your child's GPA and then what their sum total would need to be. And then as you can see over here to the right, there's an SAT comparable total, okay? So definitely check that out if your child is thinking about playing a collegiate sport. LEAP has a college-bound blog where we provide a lot of great articles that Lisa Marker-Robbins, our president and owner and founder of LEAP, writes on a variety of topics. So if you are wondering about something that relates to the college process, hop on over to our college-bound blog, and there is probably an article on that topic. Here's just a sampling of some different articles that answer a lot of questions that families have related to the testing and college-bound process. And so we're coming to the conclusion of our presentation. We're at about 45 minutes here, which is great. So we do have time for questions. I'll kind of wrap this up, and if you guys want to be thinking of your questions and typing those in, I will try to answer some of those questions for you guys because we have plenty of time here. And if, obviously if you need to get off, you can certainly do that. Okay. Is there something being presented right now? I cannot see anything. Oh, gosh, well, I am so sorry to that person because, yes, there is something being presented, and that was obviously at the beginning of the presentation. So I'll have to get with that person and send them a copy. We are recording this, so those that were not able to attend can join us and watch this later on at their convenience. So as we wrap up, the contact information is on your screen. You can visit our website at leaprogram.com. You can email us at info@leaprogram.com, or you can give us a call. We do have a Columbus number as well, but they both go to the same receptionist, so regardless of which number you call, you will get put through to the correct person. Please type your questions in if you do have any questions. I'd be happy to answer those. And then if you want me to give you a kind of a personalized testing timeline prescription that's going to be specific for your child, send me an email on info@leaprogram.com and request that, and I will be happy to do that for you. I take into consideration a variety of factors, such as your child's, the math class they're in, obviously, so we spend a lot of time talking about that. The sports and activities they're involved in, I try to avoid having you test in the main busy part of the sports season, and I'll look at a bunch of factors and try to give you an outline of when your child should test. Okay, questions. So I don't see any questions coming in, which is kind of surprising. Usually we do get a few questions, but I'll go ahead and stay on the line for just a second if anybody wants to ask any questions. Otherwise, we'll kind of wrap up the presentation and you guys can get on with your evening. I really thank you for taking time out of your evening to join us, and hopefully you learned a little bit about ACT and SAT tests and the state timeline and how these tests are required for graduation. And if you have any other questions that you think of after this presentation, certainly give us a call or email us. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. We will log off, and you have a great evening.